Today I'm continuing to work on the bridge that will carry tracks across the entrance to my train room. That's starting right now. Hi, I'm Roy Smith. In my last video, I showed you how I was using white styrofoam to make a template for a bridge that will carry the tracks on my layout across the train room entrance. The bridge must be built on a curve in a corner of the room, and for that reason will be more difficult to construct than, say, normal bridges that extend straight across a room entrance. I figured a template would help me build such a bridge. In last week's video, I also explained that I am constructing this bridge as the first step in a series of big Trackplan changes. These changes will significantly modify the way trains operate on my layout. Let me show you the progress I've made in doing this since last Saturday. This is what the styrofoam looked like at the end of last Saturday's episode. I wanted to make the bridge as narrow as possible, just wide enough to carry the tracks across it from the eastern helix over to Pocatello staging. So I began by trimming the white styrofoam template. I drew a line on the styrofoam where I wanted to make the first cut to reduce the width of the bridge as much as possible. Then I took the entire section of white styrofoam outside and cut along that line using an old razor saw. Cutting with a razor saw produces a lot less of those little beads of white styrofoam than, say, using an X-Acto knife. Even so, I did this cutting outside to avoid getting any of those beads on my layout or in my train room. After cutting the white styrofoam, I brought it back inside. Later on, I will also trim away the excess styrofoam beyond the second track. I will do that when I'm absolutely certain of how much to cut away. At this point, I was still struggling with where to put the hinges for the bridge. I could put them here so that the bridge would swing up at the eastern helix. But doing this would partially block my access to this end of the helix, and that definitely would not be good. As an alternative, I could put the hinges in back so that the bridge swings up in front of the locomotive storage shelves. I believe this second choice, that is, a swing up where the locomotive storage shelves are, is the best choice. There is a drawback to this choice, though. It would block my access to the shelves. I would have to move the shelves to a different spot in my train room. But I think moving the shelves is a better choice than blocking access to the eastern helix. Don't worry about that sag in the styrofoam sheet. The styrofoam is only going to be there long enough for me to mark and cut the template. Now remember, the first track on the bridge will continue on down this incline and arrive at the western end of Echo Canyon. Here I am, doing what I do best when working on the layout. I'm thinking about what I should do rather than actually doing it. I spend a lot of time thinking rather than doing. All right, the next big step in this project. I am removing the existing track on the upper level of the helix. The track here will be reconfigured, as you will see in a moment. Besides, the exact position of the track on the bridge depends on the configuration and position of the track on the upper level of the helix. To remove the track here, I first apply alcohol to the ballast. This alcohol will turn the ballast into a gooey mess that can be scraped away with a putty knife. Remember, I laid this track here on the upper level of the helix and applied the ballast way back in 2014 when I began to build my layout. I hesitate when doing remodeling like this because either it will lead to a big improvement in my layout or it will end up being the greatest catastrophe in the history of model railroading. I use the putty knife not only to remove the ballast, but also to pry up the track from the plywood sub-roadbed. What a mess. I may live to regret doing this. Well, let me continue to work on it, and I will come back in a moment. By the way, the track that I'm removing is Cato Double Super Elevated Track. This is what it looks like before painting and ballasting it. The track I'm removing can be cleaned up and reused, although I probably will just throw it in the garbage instead. Each level of the helix has drop feeders. I have to cut off the feeder terminals that connect to the track and remove the wires. These definitely should not be reused. Now I'm pulling the feeders down through the benchwork, and I'm disconnecting them from the terminal barrier strips under the layout. Using barrier strips like these is my favorite way to connect drop feeders to the bus wires. Everything stays neat and well organized, and it's much easier to troubleshoot later on if necessary. After I install the new track configuration on the upper level of the helix, I will be able to connect the new drop feeders for that track to the same positions on the barrier strips here. The drop feeders that I'm now removing go straight to the garbage. All right, that brings us to where we are right now on this project. First, I want to show you the status of construction. Then I explain the 3 tracks that now cross the bridge. That's right, there are now 3 tracks crossing the bridge, not just 2 as before. You can see that I've replaced the white styrofoam with extruded pink styrofoam. I no longer need the white styrofoam template because I've finalized the track arrangement. Obviously, the pink foam is very, very sturdy. It will remain here as the top layer of sub-roadbed on the bridge. I will support it with a thin layer of plywood, perhaps 1/4 of an inch thick, and of course the regular benchwork under that. At the moment, the pink foam is held in place only by the same 2 strips of wood that supported the white styrofoam. So for now, I can't run any trains across the bridge because even though it's clamped in place, it could conceivably fall down until I build the supporting benchwork. Originally, I was planning to use heavy 1/2 inch thick plywood for the bridge, but this combination of pink foam and thin plywood will be equally strong and much lighter in weight for the lift-up. I'm pretty sure that it will be a lift-up rather than a drop-down. You may remember that Steve Brown of It's My Railroad sent me 2 sheets of pink foam back in October. Well, I've used one of them here, as you can see. Here you see 2 spots where I had to do some demolition of scenery and fascia at the eastern helix in order to run the tracks across the bridge. Now let me show you the track configuration on the bridge. As I said, there are now 3 tracks running across the bridge from the eastern helix over to the Pocatello staging yard, whereas there were only 2 in last week's episode. In a moment, I will explain this change. The tracks are not yet connected at this end. I've had to order more track. It should be here in 10 days or so. Here's a drone view. These 2 tracks originally ran along the upper level of the helix and connected to the double tracks over here. That was my main line from Green River down to staging. Now each of the tracks crossing the bridge serve a different purpose. Track 1 will run over to the west end of Echo Canyon. This track is a fictional addition to my layout plan. It allows me to run a train continuously on the upper level, especially when visitors stop by. Track 2 is also fictional. It runs over to Pocatello staging. It allows me to run a second train continuously on the upper level. The addition of this track came as a big surprise to me. You may remember that Union Pacific, Sherman Hill, and N-Scale suggested I try to do something like this in last week's video. I wasn't able to do it in the computerized Trackplan, but when I got my hands on the actual track, everything just seemed to fall into place as if by magic. Again, tracks 1 and 2 are purely fictional. I know that some model railroaders would object to adding fictional tracks to a prototype layout, but again, I added them because visitors want to see trains running. Sometimes that's what I want as well. You can't see trains running very well if they spend half of their run time in helices and staging. But I haven't really given up the prototype running either, because track 3 takes eastbound trains down to staging tracks representing Cheyenne and points east. And track 4, a new addition, takes westbound trains down to staging tracks representing Portland. So you could say that I now have the best of both worlds. I can now run trains continuously on the upper level, around and around, the same way I ran my Lionel trains around and around when I was a kid. At the same time, I can still run my trains just like the prototype on my layout. That is, trains can originate off layout in staging, cross the layout, and terminate at off layout destinations, also in staging, just like real trains do. Here's a satellite view of the track configuration. And the view facing east from the helix. And the view facing westward, looking into the train room from the hallway. I will be able to remove some of that foam to the right of the tracks after I figure out how I'm going to hinge the bridge. Well, that wraps up this week's layout update. I expect to complete the bench work for the bridge prior to next week's episode. Hopefully I can then show you the bridge lifting up or possibly dropping down. And hopefully I will soon be able to run trains across the bridge. I'd like to thank you for watching this update. If you're here for the first time, I invite you to subscribe and hit that little bell icon so that you get notified of new uploads to this channel. Until next time, happy railroading. I'm Roy Smith, and I will see you again very soon.